Wow, there's a lot of people here. Hi. Thanks so much for having me. I'm having such a good time in your city so far after 24 hours. It's been amazing, good food and people. So I'm going to talk a little bit, like Tin mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about my work on NYT Now. And it's mostly just kind of learnings and observations about the process. It's not really super design focused, but I'm going to tell you some of the things I learned, and hopefully we can have a quick conversation afterwards. So it's mostly centered around talking about how you make new things at older places and more sort of established legacy media organizations. So, and the thing I want to point out is not the fact that they're old necessarily that's important, but that they're industry leaders and they're really, really good at what they do already. So trying to bring change to a place like that proved to be challenging, but also super exciting. So why are we talking about this? I'll give a brief history of the Times. So it started off as a local newspaper, the New York Daily Times. And this was the first issue in 1851. You can see like a really solid 6-column grid, no photos, just black and white. And then in 1980, it became a national paper in the US. And fast forward to 1996, our first website, nytimes.com. This is my favorite version of the first responsive website. Please open your window to the width of this line of text. So that was how you used the website. It had about 20 links on it to the stories that we published. And then in 2006 was the first m.nytimes.com, so the first mobile website. And then flash forward over the past few years, there's a suite of products on Android, iOS, the website, etc. But what I want to talk to you about today is when we created NYT Now, is the first mobile-first news product. So it was the first time that the New York Times tried to do something that wasn't directly downstream from the print. So right now, all of our systems are connected to a CMS that basically publishes the print paper, and then everything else gets published from that. So NYT Now is the first product to try to create a new, fundamentally different way to read news on the phone. And one day, we hired an outside consulting firm, which I'm not going to name, to do some market research to basically investigate how we could move forward. Because as you know, the newspaper industry, isn't doing so great right now. So we're trying to figure out new ways to make new products. So we hired a consulting firm. They came back with this. I'll give you a second to read it. It doesn't really say very much, but we gave them a lot of money to tell us this. And that basically got organizational buy-in to work on a new product like this. And it also coincided with this thing that we have at the Times called 100% Day. And it's based on Google 20% time, sort of similar to the Hack Week someone talked about earlier, where you just get a day to do whatever you want. And a colleague of mine and I worked on this project that was a lightweight news app. And basically, the fact that we did that on our own, and it coincided with what the market research said, kind of, we were able to work on the project, and it became a real thing. And we spent the early days working on this app after hours in like the Hilton across the street in Times Square, very sort of like hacked together and not a formal thing in the organization. And so when we thought about making a new news app, we wanted to figure out how to not do this. So we don't want to put the print newspaper in a phone. We want to figure out how can we create a fundamentally new way for people to get news on their phones. So I'll talk about the first phase. So quickly, we kind of assembled this rough team to work on this product. And there were two main goals. One is obviously to create new products, and two, perhaps more importantly, was to create a process for creating new products within the organization. Because, as I mentioned before, it was always the same kind of process. Everyone knew what to do. Everyone knew that the paper had to come out every day. So this was a brand new way of making products. So a quick breakdown of the building. So this building in Times Square is designed by Renzo Piano. It's a beautiful building if you ever have a chance to visit. But anyways, it's structured in a way that every discipline sits on a different floor. So 7 is design, developers sit on 8, and the newsroom is on 2, 3, and 4. And then with this new products team, we all sat together on the 9th floor. And it doesn't sound that crazy, but because we are all used to working that way, but co-locating was the first step of making this team actually have a space in the organization and for us to all work together. And this was the core team. So there was the newsroom lead, Cliff, who was a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, product guy, Ben, Brian, and myself. So we sort of, at the very beginning, ran into some interesting challenges with the role of editor and designer. So if you look at sort of the pieces that make up news, there are things that we all know and identify. So there's, here's an article. It has a headline, it has a photo, it has body text. Here's a stack of articles. There's a thumbnail and there's a headline that goes with it. And we have these like established conventions. But what we were trying to build was something that we were trying to figure out what it looked like because no one really knew yet. So the role of editor and designer was sort of had to come towards each other because the editors would say, okay, you design it and I'll write the words. And we'd say, no, you write the words and then we design it. So we were kind of just stuck in this like chicken and egg situation where we were like, okay, you have to move towards me and I'll move towards you. And then, but we definitely had some challenges at the beginning where we were like not understanding each other at all because we were all trying to do things the way that we always did them. And it was super frustrating and I had to wear boxing gloves to meetings. So we sat in rooms like this and sort of sketched and brainstormed, and this looks like a familiar format to us all. But to some people in the room, this was really new and different way of working. So here are some early sketches of the app. It went through different names. It had different structures. Some were bad, some were okay. This was actually on the right here, NYT Notes. That was the very first 100% day project version. And it was basically like a stack of 10 stories, and then when you read it, it goes away, like collapses and disappears. Not a great idea, but that's what we did. So then, after some sketching, we came up with this first version of the app, and we actually built it in iOS, and it was like, we were super excited. It took 2 months, and we were like, NYT, go, we got it. And it was so bad. Nobody liked it, we didn't like it, the users didn't like it, it was just like, fail. So we learned our first lesson that everyone already knows, but make something that people want. So we went through this phase of definition, and basically what we should have done before, building the app, obviously. So we did a series of these things called, I don't know if you guys have done these before, but we worked with someone from IDEO to do these prompts that were basically like really quick drawings. So I made like a series of 30 of these. And they're basically like an ad for what the app would be when you are done with it. And we printed these out on paper. It was super analog way of user testing. And we put it in front of people and we were like challenging our assumptions. So we thought, we were like, okay, people want to finish the news. They just want to like read all the news and be done. And that's what they want. And so we put this in front of a few people, and mostly the reaction we got was like, I don't know what's finished the news. Like I closed Facebook and then I'm finished. So our initial assumption of people wanting to complete the news was off, and we were able to learn that really quickly. And then we thought, okay, maybe people just want like a little bit of news, like just enough. Do you want a little bit? And that didn't really stick either. The one that did resonate with people was get informed in an elevator ride. So we had this like really crappy drawn by me, but just like really quick sketch of someone being able to picture themselves in this scenario where they're walking or they're like in line and they're like checking the news and they're like, oh yeah, this is what I want. So that was like a really quick way for us to go in one direction. And the things we learned about our users were they have FOMO, so they don't want to miss out on anything. They have a fear of missing out. They want to get up to speed quickly, and they want their friends to know that they know the news. So it wasn't enough to just read the news. It was like, I want you to know that, and I want to be able to talk about it. I want you to know that I read the news. And then we did this really fun exercise, which was about personifying the app. So we were thinking about, like, the New York Times is sometimes perceived as like a gray lady or like an old person, or has a very specific voice. And so we wanted to define a voice for the app that was related but unique. So we were thinking about if the app was a person, how would they dress? Where would they live? These people look like they live in Brooklyn, and they have this specific character, and they're smart and they're witty, but they're also friendly and approachable. So the New York Times is often, seen as this publication that's like kind of on a pedestal and like just telling you the news. And we wanted NYT Now to be more of a conversation that was more back and forth with our users. And then we came up with this app definition statement, your guide to the news. So that was really important to help us form the product. And then we came up with these product principles, which were basically like pinned up on the wall, and we were always going back to them every time we had to make a big decision. So these were the most important things to the product. So getting up to speed quickly, help me feel prepared, tell me what's changed, satisfy my curiosity, and integrate with my life. So basically those things helped us form the initial direction for where we wanted to go. And then the next sort of area of focus was yeah, no. Oh, it took about, so we built the first app in like 2 months, and then we threw it away, and then it was like another month of the user research.
That's very clever, kind of the way you kind of came with a vision there. Like, I'm just trying to wonder how long did it take you guys to kind of
solidify the vision? Yeah, about probably a month and a half. And it was interesting because we had a team of designers and developers, and nobody was doing their actual work. We were all kind of like brainstorming this because we didn't want to go and build the wrong thing again. So we were all kind of like in rooms together doing this. And then this is one of my favorite quotes from Frank Camaro: "People ignore design that ignores people." So we were trying to figure out the human part of this app and what people need when they read the news and how people think about the news. So first few things, one thing we thought about was the architecture of the app. So how do you talk about the news? This is the regular New York Times app. I think this is the older version, but anyways, this is a structure, and it's based on a newspaper print structure. So it's based on like physical sections that you take out of the paper, and you pick up the world section, you read it, and that's how we structured our apps. But when you think about how you talk to your friends about the news, you're like, oh, what's the latest on the Ukraine crisis? Not world, and then click on it. And then what do you think about climate change? You don't think science before that. You just kind of talk about the topics. So what we did was break out of the section hierarchy in architecture, and we structured the app around the actual news, which is not shocking, but it is definitely a digital-first approach. So it wasn't based on the print sections, it was based on what was actually happening. So if you scroll through the app, you quickly, at a high level, get, these headers stick to the top, and you quickly get an idea of what's going on before you tap into anything. More on that. And then also, as I mentioned before, we wanted to establish a voice for the app that was related to the New York Times, but unique. So we had this thing called the morning briefing, and we started using Good Morning in the app. And out of all the hard work we did, this was people's favorite parts. It was just like these like, our editor calls them grace notes, or like finishing touches, where they were just like, oh, good morning. Like, the New York Times is saying good morning, that's nice. And the other big thing was thinking about when people needed information. So structuring the news around people's actual daily habits. So in the morning, you need a big overview. You've been asleep for hours. You need to make sure like nothing's crazy is going on, and you need like an overall digest. And then later on, you needed something a little bit different. So we noticed that some people read an article at their desk after, and so we put in this like nice long read for you to read after lunch. And the quick story about this that was really interesting to me. Before we were publishing this every day at around noon and 1, and it wasn't labeled. It was labeled like with the subject of the article. But then one day we labeled it your lunchtime read, and the traffic on it shot up. So, and it was this exact same kind of content. But basically, by framing it as your lunchtime read, people were using it that way. And they just, oh, this is my lunchtime read. I'm going to read it. It's lunch. I'm going to read it. And so they understood how to use it by that really, really simple framing. And then similarly, your evening briefing, kind of a wrap up of the news day. So this is kind of how we would map out the day for people. It would be like, okay, in the morning, is everything okay? you know, I just need to catch up, and then pauses, and then end of the day sort of reading. And then another thing we thought about was where people were reading the news. So I think a few apps do this now where they put the read time on the article. So our initial assumption was, okay, people don't want to read these long pieces on their phones. But it wasn't really that they didn't want to read it on their phone. It was more they didn't want to read it while they're walking out the door or while they're in line. That's not like the best place to read it. But if you're at home in bed, you know, that's a great place to read a long piece. So we put the read time on long articles, and that helped people quickly save them for later. And going back to my initial point, that was what made it mobile instead of print. That was a very specific mobile decision. And then the last thing is, how much do you need to know? So the New York Times publishes around 200 articles a day, but you don't really need to know all those things. And for a specific audience, it's more important and valuable for you to just say, this is what you need to know. Like, we're taking that responsibility, so you don't have to choose, but here's 30 or 40 of the best stories, and you can just read those and feel like you're caught up. So we worked on the first version of this app, and it came out in April 2 years ago. And I obviously only put the good reviews up here, but we got pretty good feedback. And we're the best win in from my perspective is we're able to actually drop the average age of a New York Times user by 25 years, which was one of the biggest goals we set out to do in the beginning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my sort of lessons that I learned working on it. So make drawings and ask everyone else to draw too. So the initial challenge I talked about at the beginning were the editor and the designer. I think the main problem was we didn't have a common language. So the editors, we were all using words, but that wasn't enough to understand what was going on. And from everyone else's perspectives, designers are supposed to draw. But actually, it was a lot more beneficial when everyone could just use our medium to express what they were thinking. So it was a little bit of a challenge at first, because we'd be like, can you please draw this? And they'd be like, that's your job. And I'd be like, no, it's everyone's job. So we got everyone sort of in the room drawing together, like, you know, kindergarten class. And show your work to as many people as possible. So we would make these, we had formal user testing sessions, but we would also make these quick things when we had, you know, debates or arguments about things. We would just make a quick prototype, and we'd go down to the lobby and show like 4 random people. And obviously that's not scientifically sound, but it was a really quick way to sort of gut check and understand if people understood basic things. And then focus on tiny wins to move the giant ship. So while working at a big organization, I learned this the hard way, that there are just some things that are completely off limits. Like they're like sacred cow, can't touch it. And I'll talk about this in how it relates to the app, but really quick thing. So I'm not sure how many people know, but the New York Times homepage and most news sites are ranked in order of editorial importance. So the way the Times works is, you know, the first story is there, and then it kind of like moves around that way, and then less important stuff is further down. So I'll talk about why that is important when I show you the app. Okay, so quick story about focusing on the tiny wins. So we weren't able to move the hierarchy, basically. What we wanted to do in the app was move things around so that they would be based on newness of the news. So if you imagine this website as an app, if that Jeb Bush story on the top left, although fascinating, if that was in the first place on the app every time you opened it, you would think that nothing was new, and it would be boring and no one would come back. And that's really obvious to us, but it was really important to the organization that the news stay in order of the editors. So that was a big challenge that we couldn't get past on the first round. But then, version 2, a year later, we made a few changes to the product. First of all, it was free. And second of all, it was ordered in order of newness. So we were able to, after 1 year of testing it out and using it, I'll point out the changes here. So basically, the one on the left, and that image is a little bit shifted, but the basic construct of the app was 2 tabs. So news was the New York Times news, and the second tab with that arrow was news from other sources. So our editors were curating things from around the web, and there was this. The way that we solved the most important story being on top is that the first tab was ordered like 1, 2, 3, 4 in order of ranking, and then the second tab was more like Twitter, where it was reverse cron. And what we found, which some of us already knew, was that nobody was going to the second tab because they didn't really have a reason to. They would just open the app and they'd be like, oh, nothing's new in here, okay, bye, close it. So the second version just is like one simple reverse cron stream of all the news in order. And then when it was updated, a story from Gawker could be on top of our most important story of the day. And that was a kind of big deal, and it took a while to get to, but that was really a good transition in the second version. And yeah, that's basically it. So now this version is out in the App Store, and you should download it. That's all I have.
Hi, nice
Hi.
presentation.
Thanks.
I'm interested in when you were talking about cutting down the amount of news that you would be serving to the customers, users, so that you would simplify the process for them, so you kind of filter what's important for them.
Right.
What was the policy behind that? Is it an editorial policy, so someone actually decides what's important and what gets served to the customers, or do you try to serve them with what you think that they want to read?
That's a great question. We talked a lot about personalization at the beginning of this process, and the quick answer is we had a staff of editors 24/7, so they were filling the app with what they thought was most important from the Times and from the internet. They were basically just online all day picking up stories. And it was really important to us that because we talked a lot about personalization, but I feel like it was kind of a buzzword. It was kind of like everyone wants personalized news. But for us, it was really important because we felt that people already have set up their channels on Twitter and Facebook, and everything you use is set up based on what you like to read. And it was an important service of this app to say, to start conversations between people that have different interests. So if you and I only read about what we like, then we can't really talk about things in common. So this was like, I don't know if you noticed in the app, there are bullet points of the most important stories. So if you don't want to read the entire piece, it's kind of like a shortcut. But at least you know the basics. At least you know what's going on, and then you can kind of move forward. But it's important not to be able to filter by what you like to read only. Yeah. So it started off. The business model was actually brought in by the outside consultant. They said, there's a market for this. You charge X. By this time, you'll have this much money. And that was really appealing as a business model, but the problem was it came before the actual product. And as you know, you can get a lot of news, basically the way that product behaved was more like Facebook, and that's a free experience that people are used to being free. But the price was tied to something that existed before it was born. So what we found was it was more valuable to us over the long term to have more people and attract this younger audience and have more people using the product than for it to be a short-term win and have a subscription. So it took a year, and it was related to those first things I talked about in version 1. But eventually it was obvious that people were using it throughout the day multiple times, which is really remarkable for an app now. So we were getting a lot of usage, and we didn't want to block people from doing that, and kind of shifted it over to more advertising-based monetizing. So I thought that was really. I mean, it was a really tough decision, and obviously it's hard to reverse something.
Apps and other products in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think actually one of the most important parts of making this app was it provided a really good sandbox for us to test out ideas and then put them and funnel them back through the core app. So it's really hard to make, as you know, product changes to products that affect so many people. But by making this side app, we were able to sort of have an environment where we could do that.
I have a question. Were you working at the times when the internal report, innovation report was published? And can you touch on that? And maybe also just say what that report was for the people that haven't seen it, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So, so we were doing an internal report around sort of processes and how the New York Times could be better at making things. It was kind of like a internal exploration. They hired a few reporters from within the company to kind of investigate our processes and identify places we could get better. And then the report got leaked or was fake leaked or something. It ended up on the internet, and it was basically just like exposing all of our weaknesses, naming specific people, naming things that were meant to be internally used, and it was out on the internet. But I think it was actually really beneficial because it made us kind of hustle, made us look at these things and be critical, and I think it was good for the world to see that we were actually questioning these things. So so that was the innovation report. You should, if you have a chance to check it out. The copy that fake leaked was like a photocopy, and it's kind of slanted, and then we published like the real version later since it was already out. But it was a good story.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. And on a more practical note, what else did you do as a part of your user research? What kind of methods, techniques? How many users? How often?
Well, the formal user testing was set up. It wasn't super fast. It was like once every 2 weeks. Every time, basically, we had a new, bigger concept to test, and the things we were using were basically whatever would do the job fastest. So it was before InVision and all of those were out. So it was more like keynote things, and like, sometimes we had it in a real build, sometimes we had that piece of paper. So it was basically like whatever served the question that we needed to do. And then there was the more informal, like run out in the street and ask that guy what he thinks testing, which is my favorite kind because, it's immediate. You get a gut check really quickly. So we did that.
Do you have a magical number of users that the people in the company will start believing? So, for instance, I know in many cases people just go out and ask like 3-4 people, and then nobody in the company believes them because that's not large enough number. Yeah. So, what's your experience on that?
Well, I mean, we would test about 6 to 7 people a day for an hour each, but the thing, I think the problem with user testing, the bigger problem with it is everyone's interpretation of it is whatever proves your own thing, right? So, I could go and say that lady, found that thing really quickly, and someone else could say the opposite. So I think it's less about the quantity and more about different mechanisms that you put in place to test out the same things. So, if you do like a survey, if you do like more quantitative research and like, track how people click on things, and it's more about the bigger picture. Because I don't think like user testing 6 people will never give you something that's statistically sound, in my opinion.
What's from your perspective the perfect kind of design team? How many people? What roles? How did that change from, let's say, the Times to Meetup? What would be your ideal team to work in?
Well, I think someone was talking about this earlier, but it would be, someone thinking about the architecture of the product, someone that's able to visually express that really quickly, and then bringing people in at a very early stage that are not designers, but sort of making the design process more about what we all know it is about, but kind of like bringing the organization in really early to witness that and be part of it. So it's not like designers working on their own, but kind of everyone understanding the point of all the things that we're doing together.
Do you have any tips or tricks to share how to get your higher ups to start sketching? Do you have some exercises?
Oh yeah, I had so many tricks.
Yeah, can you share some of them?
Yeah, sure. kind of a little bit by like nice force. Like it was more just like we're getting this. We ran design sprints there as well, and it was kind of like I think allowing people to see that this is just an important part of making a good product. Like they were able to see how it all came together, how you make decisions. It's not just like pulling something out of your brain and like saying it's the prettiest one, I'm going to do that. Like it was just about exposing people to the process and sort of like inching closer to it slowly and just like, okay, here's a Sharpie and a piece of paper, just like draw a box. Let's start there. So it was a very slow process, but I think over time people saw that it was really important.